research design. So let's have a look on the research process again. So you have a reality, an issue, a problem, a research problem, and you want to formulate a scientific formulation of the problem. You have to give the definitions of the concepts. And then you have to do either a literature review if you know already a lot, or if already a lot is known about a research phenomenon or research problem. And or you can do both. You can use expert interviews. You can derive from the literature review the theories. This enables the researcher to develop the conceptual model with the research questions for exploratory qualitative research, or the hypothesis for the quantitative deductive research. And then up from this depend the research method or the research design, either for research question or exploratory research, the qualitative research approach with a non-random sample and preliminary assumptions in order to generate theories, or the quantitative research approach where we test hypotheses with a representative sample, with hypotheses that you can falsify or accept, and in order to measure a conceptual quantitative model with hypothesis, research hypothesis. Qualitative versus quantitative research. Which empirical method is better suited? So again, if you have an established theory, so from your literature review, you will derive hypotheses, and you will do a literature review with existing research from which you justify your hypothesis, which you will then test quantitatively with existing measurement scales and experiments, observations, surveys. And from these findings, you will validate or revise or reject theory. So it's a circle. From theory, you test the theory, and from the findings, you will validate your hypothesis and thus theory, or reject your hypothesis and just reject and revise theory. On the other hand, in the qualitative exploratory approach, you start from empirical sense. You do qualitative research, in-depth interviews, groups, ethnography, text mining, which enables you to gather empirical material. And this reveals structures and patterns for generalization in order to generate a theory, which you then in the second step can again test through a deductive approach, that is hypothesis testing with quantitative approaches in order to validate the theory. And so we cannot say quantitative approaches are better than qualitative approaches, or deductive quantitative approaches are superior to inductive qualitative approaches. Both are necessary, and to generate theory we need both. When we have exploratory research, we rather use inductive qualitative research in order to reveal new structures, in order to generate new theories. For example, in the technology research, a lot of qualitative research is done, or also in human resources management, because you go deeper in the findings. On the other hand, if theory is known, if concepts are known, these concepts can be used and tested in conceptual models, and then subsequently with quantitative research, this model is tested. Quantitative research fits better in confirmatory approaches if the research question is narrowly defined and profound knowledge theory is available, whereas qualitative research is rather exploratory when the research question is not defined and little knowledge is available. Theory is tested, so it's a deductive approach, deductive with hypotheses which are tested, whereas qualitative research is inductive without hypothesis. So theory becomes the end point in an inductive approach. Quantitative research is rather causal, with a focus on spatio-temporal independent causal law statements. So the results should be generalizable for empirical generalizations, independent from space, time, and the location. This is not applicable to qualitative research. The sample is representative. In quantitative research, representative for the population, and the sample is drawn from the mother population, whereas in qualitative research, the sample is non-representative. And the generalizability of the results is, the results should be, as I already said, spatio-temporal independent. The validity of the results for the population, so the results should hold no matter of the country, the time, and everything's independent. Whereas the results are not valid for the entire population for qualitative research.
And so that is why qualitative research designs apply when few literature and knowledge exists, when you want to understand new research topics, when theories and knowledge, new concepts, topics should be generated for future quantitative research. You cannot generate hypotheses, but rather research questions. So deductive research, where you generalize from individual observations to general knowledge, even if generalization is not the target. For example, if in a representative German sample of swans in one German lake, all swans are white, the swans in all German lakes should be white. If you want to generate theory and knowledge by doing focus groups, by doing in-depth interviews, case studies, by formulating research questions and no hypothesis, by using open-ended questions, broad questions that explore the topic. For example, what do you think about IoT? What do you think about smart connected objects? What do you think about chatbots? Leave them. Why do you think? So there are very large sub-questions with which you can explore the topic. And you can see it here. You start with a large research question, then you collect data with open-ended questions. You analyze the data in order to find broad patterns, generalizations, and theories, and you compare these patterns with literature to generate generalizations and theories. The start point is a research question. The end point is the theory. For example, here are some questions. So what is your perception about AI, autonomous cars, smart homes, or chatbots? Do you perceive control for autonomous cars or smart homes? What do you think about brain-implanted chips? Which technologies will shape the retail industry? For example, for the study about brain-implanted chips, make much more sense than to do a qualitative research, right? Because actually the technology is so abstract so that most consumers do not really can understand. Most persons are not able for new technologies to give an opinion that you can formulate in a closed research question. On the other hand, so quantitative research, when theory is known, if you want to generalize your observations from generalizations, so for example, if in a representative German sample, so representativity is important, of different German lakes, all swans are white, then the swans must also be white in the lake Constance. For example, if you find in your study about brain-implemented chips that privacy concerns are very important, if you find that in Germany, you should find the results also in Munich or Cologne or Hamburg. Independent of the fact that it's northern Germany or southern Germany, the results should be the same. So you're doing most of analysis, which is done here with regression analysis or structural equation modeling, so quantitative methods to test hypotheses with if questions. So if the independent variable changes, then the dependent variable should also change. And so these statements are tested with quantitative methods. You will establish a conceptual model, a visual model, in which you show the interconnections through the different hypotheses. And theory is validated or rejected by your hypothesis testing, which you accept or which you reject. And this is also called hypothetic deductive approach. The starting point is that you use theory, you establish hypotheses from the theory in your literature review, you will operationalize your variables and measurement concepts through measurement scales. You collect data, will validate, reject the hypothesis, and validate or confirm or reject hypotheses. When knowledge and literature is well established, you should use this approach as you employ an explicit existing theory. For example, theory of justice for the complaint management. We know that the theory of justice or equity theory is a very good theory that fits well to measure complaint management. Then it makes sense to use this theory. Or for loyalty program research and theories, also the equity theory, but also social relationship theories. We have theories of perceived value. So all these theories fit well, are well established in literature. That is why it makes sense to use this theory to explain how loyalty programs work. Are they efficient or not? And the hypotheses are formulated in like the following. So explain causes and consequences of a phenomenon. So this is a typical regression equation with a constant and different variables. So for example, you want to explain loyalty. So loyalty is positively affected by monetary rewards, or by, in this example, happiness with the product, or for example, smart home intention of use, typically TAM model, is positively affected by perceived ease of use, or data disclosure in smart home is negatively affected by privacy. This is typically a causality. So in your hypothesis, you explain the consequences of the change of an independent variable on dependent or to explaining variable. And advice, when you write hypothesis, be consistent. Use a consistent form, use the same word order in the questions to enable the reader to easily identify the major variables, because the more they are current, if you have 5 to 10 hypotheses, the easier it becomes for the reader to follow your argument. For example, the higher the privacy concerns, the lower the trust. The lower the trust, the lower the willingness of data disclosure. Or the higher the perceived risk of data hacking, the lower the willingness of data disclosure. Or the higher the perceived ease of an autonomous vehicle is, the higher is the perceived usefulness. The higher the trust into an autonomous vehicle, the higher is its perceived usefulness. So give directional hypotheses and not only the link. For example, trust is related to perceived usefulness, or perceived usefulness is related to intention to use, or privacy concerns is related to willingness for data closure. So it's important to give the direction of the hypothesis. Again, I come back to the literature review. The hypothesis should be justified. So do not only enumerate your hypothesis, they should be, for every hypothesis, there should be one paragraph in which you define the concept. And for example, here, what are privacy concerns? What is willingness to data disclosure? And show how literature deals with it. And what is the status quo of the literature? And what is the impact of privacy concerns on data disclosure by citing the literature? And from this, you then derive the hypothesis. This brings me to zero and alternative hypothesis. Zero hypothesis is that there's no relationship, no difference, whereas the alternative hypothesis predicts a difference of a relationship. By formulating the hypothesis, formulating the alternative hypothesis. Already saying that actually there is a significant difference in the relationship between the different concepts. The next important point is that you should always formulate a directional hypothesis that predicts a difference or relationship and its direction. Do not only say there's a link between the possession of a loyalty card and a purchase basket. Show the link, the direction. So the possession of a loyalty card has a positive impact on baskets. Or the possession of a loyalty card increases the effects on the direction. Social benefits of autonomous vehicles have a positive impact on perceived utilities. Do not say only social benefits have an impact. Show if the impact is positive or negative. Or for example, firms' big data analytics culture has a positive effect on big data analytics use.
The general procedure of hypothesis testing is the following one. We have different significant levels. The 005 or 5% level or the 001 1% level, which means that with 5% we accept the alternative hypothesis, that is that we consider there's a significant difference in the means of the tested concepts, or a highly significant difference the means of the tested concepts. General highly significant means 1% probability and significant means 5% probability. You have to distinguish between different types of variables. So the independent or explanatory variables, which are the variables that probably cause outcomes. For example, social, relational, utilitarian benefits, or resources, or firm culture. So the variables that explain a phenomenon. So for example, also privacy concerns in the technology acceptance model. And there are the dependent or to explain variables, which are the outcome variables that depend on the independent variables. For example, the impact of technologies or privacy concerns or social benefits on well-being, loyalty, satisfaction, usage, adoption, use, or firm performance. We have the mediating variables, which are variables that stand between independent and dependent variables and transmit the effects, for example, ease of use of a technology, privacy concerns, trust, satisfaction with personalization. So they mediate the impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable. And we have the moderating variables, which are predictor variables that affect positively or negatively the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. For example, age. The younger the age is, the higher might be the adoption probability of well-being on intention to use, or that type of buyer. The bigger the income, the bigger the buyer. For example, in a loyalty program, platinum buyers have probably higher probabilities to use a loyalty program, so there's an amplifying impact, whereas smaller buyers have a decreasing impact between the link of purchasing and loyalty. There might be demographic variables or country variable, which might, for example, impact positively or negatively the impact on a dependent variable. For example, privacy concerns should positively impact or amplify the negative impact on adoption of use. In Western countries, whereas in, for example, China, Eastern countries, privacy concerns should be lower, and there should be a decreasing impact of privacy concerns on intention of use of new technologies, for example, smartphones, smart homes, or autonomous cars.
And finally, the hypotheses are summarized in a graphical figure, which is called conceptual model.
You have here the independent variables, for example, social benefits, economic and service benefits, should have a positive impact on a mediating variable, satisfaction. So the higher these benefits, the higher the satisfaction. Satisfaction is a mediating variable on trust. So the higher the satisfaction, the higher the trust. And we have the dependent variable loyalty. The benefits can have a direct effect on the dependent variable or an indirect effect via the mediating variables, satisfaction and trust. And we have the moderating variables, for example, age, income, type of buyer. So for example, the platinum, the customer, so the higher the tier in the loyalty program, the higher should be the impact of satisfaction on loyalty or of loyalty benefits on loyalty. Or the higher the age, lower should be the impact of these benefits on loyalty. Moderating variables have a positive, amplifying, or negative, decreasing impact on the main concepts, the independent and mediating variables on the dependent variables. Mediating variables can also amplify. That is why it's important to test the direct effects of the dependent variables and the indirect effect of the independent variables on the dependent variables through the mediating variables. Now, this is the summary of the hypothesis, which is summarized in a graph, which is also called the conceptual model. Let's see some examples. We have the impact of loyalty programs on different output variables. For example, the benefits, the accumulation of points or tangible or intangible rewards, which might be economic, hedonic, information, utilitarian, social, relational benefits are the independent variables, they should have a direct impact on efficiency profits, which are the dependent variables. That is, they should increase purchase baskets, purchase frequencies, purchase recency, decrease switching behavior, and decrease the number of point of sales visited. And the theory which is behind that is the theory of consumer producer theory of Tversky and Kahneman and Thaler. So customers try to minimize cost and maximize utilities. So the more they increase the utilities here, or the independent variables, the lower should be the cost, and the higher should be the impact on the dependent variable. Here, the concept model of smart home adoption. So we have here independent variables. The lower the effort expectancy, the higher there should be the performance expectancy. So they have an impact on the mediating variable performance expectancy. We have also another mediating variable, well-being. So the lower the effort expectancy, the higher should be the well-being, and the lower should be the bad-being. On the other hand, we have independent variable privacy concerns, technology fear. They should have a negative impact on the mediating variable trust. In turn, trust as mediating variable should have a positive impact on behavior intention to use. So the higher the trust, the higher the intention to use, which is the dependent variable. Or the higher the mediating variable well-being, the higher the well-being, the higher should be also the behavioral intention to use. Technology security should have a positive impact on the mediating variable of trust, which should then increase the behavioral intention to use. And we have a moderating variable, which is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance, so the more customers want to avoid uncertainty, link between well-being and behavioral intention should be decreased. And the lower this intention of uncertainty avoiding, the higher should be the impact of well-being on behavioral intention to use. Conceptual model about autonomous vehicles adoption. Yeah, independent variables such as effort expectancy, social recognition, perceived hedonism, which influence mediating variables such as well-being, trust, and subsequently influence the dependent variables, behavior, intention of use. There's one moderator variable, user innovativeness. So the higher the innovativeness of the user, the higher should be also the impact of well-being and performance expectancy on behavioral intention to use. Another example here, we have the social network characteristics, intimacy of the network and size of the network, which are the independent variables, which influence subsequently social capital, composed of bonding social capital and bridging social capital. Bonding social capital being the highly intimate contacts, and bridging social capital are loose contacts. And these mediating variables subsequently influence positively the dependent variables, happiness and Facebook impact on well-being. Another example is this one. So we have big data resources as independent variables, which influence market-directed capabilities as mediating variables, which subsequently influence the dependent variable firm performance, namely customer satisfaction, profitability. And there's one moderating variable, which is the business strategy, namely differentiation versus cost domination, according to the framework of Michael Porter. Or here we have independent variables, data accuracy, format and completeness, influence the mediating variable, information quality, subsequently big data analytics use, and the dependent variables are customer relationship performance and financial performance. Quantitative methods are surveys, experiments, observations. Various qualitative approaches are ethnography, case studies, interviews, and focus groups. Quantitative approaches use established measurement scales, closed predetermined numeric coded questions, measuring through theory identified concepts and variables. Various qualitative research uses open-ended questions. The quantitative approaches has performance data, attitudes, behavior to measure. Various qualitative approaches measure text, video, image, and documents, so are much larger information documents. For quantitative approaches, one uses statistical analysis such as regression, structural equation modeling, analysis of variances. Whereas for qualitative approaches, there's text mining and qualitative word count. For quantitative approaches, one uses statistical tests to verify the hypothesis with the confidence intervals from 1% to 5%. Whereas for qualitative approaches, one uses themes, topics, patterns to emerge in order to interpret the data. Today, researchers use both approaches, which is also called mixed approaches. First, they use mostly qualitative approaches to make themes, topics, patterns, and theories emerge. And then they use quantitative approaches to test the theories.